Since the dawn of time, small groups of human beings have instilled artificial circular limitations on the minds of their subjects through the procession of history. Traditionally, the limitations are imprinted on the servile population through a cunning use of language, instruction, and media for the purposes of conquest, social cohesion, and authoritative order by harnessing the human resources of the broad population. Human history reflects countless stories, regardless of what era you happen to live in, and the common thread throughout these stories is that of the struggle between the state, whatever its form, and the individual, the goal of which is to harness and subsume the individual, willingly or unwillingly, into its group collective.
From the time we're very young, we're taught to, worship authority basically because that's our key to survival as young children. But as adults, we never go through the rites of passage that tell us how to methodically think for ourselves, and thus we're always in a state of extended adolescence.
Well, we take all this stuff, whether it's the television or it's the enculturation, the schoolyards, the teachers, we take this whole system, we put it into our unconscious mind. And it is the GIGO that comes out, garbage in, garbage out. We simply, in that computer language, have harnessed our own power by accepting all these beliefs as though they are factual.
If we don't resist all of the different information that comes our way and weigh it and use our own mind instead of what somebody else wants us to think, eventually society would become nothing more than automatons, robots.
The establishment it's protected itself unless you submit to the saturation and indoctrination and adopt all its values. You can't get in.
Everyone needs to find out and really think about it. What is going too far? Because all of this is happening so fast, you need to be ahead of the game. They're ahead of the game.
And just kind of letting it all flow by and being apathetic about it just gets you in a position of being controlled.
Mind control has existed since the dawn of time. Only the methods have changed. Elites have always known, if I can control the minds of my people, I control them. Only the technology has changed. It's still the same program. It's never stopped.
And so what you have is everybody's born into this control structure. Everybody's born into authority. Everyone's born into this situation. But just because you have an authority making decisions for you at some point when you're very young, too young to take care of yourself, doesn't mean you should always cater to authority your whole life.
We control you. We control your mind. We make you believe you have no creative power. We make you forget you have imagination, which is the core capability from which you can invent your own reality.
The education our children are going to get has nothing to do with education. It is training our children to be resources, human resources, that's the way they refer to us, to spin off profits for the globalists.
The greatest barrier to discovery is not ignorance. It's the illusion of knowledge, and that's what the 15,000 hours in compulsory schooling really entrains and conditions into us.
When training, which is Skinner, Pavlov, beats education, civilization dies.
Okay, welcome to Chapter 1, where we are going to begin learning about the true nature of our reality. Chapter 1 is all about Fabian socialism, the use of propaganda and perception management to control groupthink dumb nodes on a variety of hive mind networks. And as I said, by the time we're done with this chapter, there's 3 parts. You will understand exactly what that means. But we're going to start this with part 1, which is the 7 sentences published a century ago that reveal exactly why the world is the way it is today and why people act the way they do, especially on social media. And these 7 sentences come from a book published in 1928 by Edward Bernays called Propaganda. And these 7 sentences are actually the first 7 sentences of the book that literally lay out how our reality is created. And we're going to go over that in a second, but I wanted to start just real quickly going over who Edward Bernays is, because not everybody knows who he was. not everybody knows about this book. So let's take a quick look at this article and see who Edward Bernays was. So, meet Edward Bernays, the father of public relations who transformed consumer culture in America. Now, he was Sigmund Freud's nephew, and he combined psychology with public relations to sell everything from bacon to cigarettes and even a coup. Edward Bernays was a mere business consultant on the surface, but in practice, he was a skilled surgeon of popular opinion. What his uncle Sigmund Freud was to psychology, Bernays was to public relations. He studied human instinct like a hawk. He understood that people were driven by unconscious motivations and that these could be exploited. He not only satisfied corporate clients, he literally sold the American public on a 1954 coup d'etat orchestrated by the CIA and the United Fruit Company in Guatemala. Bernays attended Cornell University, and upon graduating, he returned to New York City with a curiosity for journalism that landed him at the Medical Review of Reviews. It was here that he realized how altering public discourse could shift opinion and change the world. When a play about venereal disease lacked funding due to its controversial subject, Bernays set up a sociological fund committee. Suddenly, notable citizens paid to applaud the play as a noteworthy cause for public health instead of as an obscenity. When World War I broke out, Bernays hoped to enlist but was turned away for imperfect vision. His intellect was in high demand, however, and the newly established U.S. Information Agency hired him to promote America's reasons for entering the war. Now, I want to stop here real quick because I want to point out, just in case anybody wants to fact check me out there, that this author was a little bit lazy because the U.S. Information Agency was not created until 1953. He was actually hired by the Committee for Public Information, which was created by Woodrow Wilson in 1917 to generate American support for World War I. Because World War I was very unpopular, no Americans wanted to be in it, and so they needed to create basically a public opinion that supported America going to war. And this is what they hired Bernays for. So when doing your research, you have to check everything. I looked into this U.S. Information Agency and I found out, no, he didn't actually work for them. It wasn't even created until 1953. So anyway, just wanted to point that out. As far as Calvin Coolidge, unlikable and stern on the surface, Calvin Coolidge hired Bernays to polish his image during his re-election campaign in 1924. Bernays organized a party on the White House lawn featuring contemporary superstars like Al Jolson. National papers picked up the story and portrayed Coolidge as a charming figure who was handily re-elected weeks later. And they still use this today. I mean, do you remember when Bill Clinton showed him playing the saxophone and promoted him as this cool figure that people fell in love with? And it's all propaganda. The entire political facade is all propaganda, and we're going to get into that in this chapter here. His broadest and deadliest campaign occurred in 1929. Smoking had been in vogue for years, but American women were seen as lower class by doing so. So what he did was he hired models and actors for what's called his Torches of Freedom event on Easter Sunday. He orchestrated a Fifth Avenue Easter Sunday parade in Manhattan with such precision that it was essentially scripted. Professional photographers were on hand to capture the glamour. His casting was precise, as were his directions on where to stand and how to smoke. Professional photographers on hand to capture the glamour. The very next day, the American Tobacco Company saw its products praised by the New York Times. Page 1 news declared, "Group of girls puff at cigarettes as a gesture of freedom." As a result, cigarette sales among women skyrocketed. Bernays had done his job. Chronicling his insight into societal manipulation in 1928, Edward Bernays' propaganda is as ominous today as it was prophetic when he wrote it. And we're going to show you how ominous it was. He described the invisible tool as the modern instrument of powerful, intelligent men who must wield it in order to bring order out of chaos. And that's the title of the first chapter. And as we know, Ordo ab chao is the prominent motto for the Scottish Rites of Freemasonry. So, there you go. Finally, wrapping this up, his detractors, according to the New York Times, called him a glorified press agent at best, a young Machiavelli at worst. His legacy is one of extreme cunning, with his work guided not by any moral compass, but the mere demand of his clients. He formed interest groups to manufacture consent and mold minds. So that's Edward Bernays. That's who we're dealing with when we look at these 7 sentences that define the world as it is today. So let's go back. Now, as we see from the picture on the book here, this man in the middle is representative of the public. And we see these strings being controlled by hands on the outer edges. And he talks about that in these 7 sentences. So let's take a look at these 7 sentences, and here it is, Organizing Chaos, Chapter 1. Now we're going to break these down sentence by sentence and dissect the words that he uses to really understand what's going on here. So let's just take the first sentence. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. So, what do we have here? He's telling us that the organized habits and opinions of the masses, of the population, is being consciously and intelligently manipulated to form a democratic society. Okay? And what I'm going to show you in chapter 6 about the democracy deception is that what they consider a democratic society isn't even close to what the meaning of democracy really is. And it's part of the deception that they use to convince people to stay in this reservation, to stay in this system. Okay? So our habits and opinions are intelligently manipulated. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. So right there in the second sentence, he tells you that this country is being ruled by an invisible government that manipulate the habits and opinions of the masses. So the government that everyone believes is in power clearly is just a front, like a Potemkin village that people see as the leaders, but in fact they're just actors. They're actors portraying a role on the world stage. And the real power is behind the scenes being run by an invisible government. And so already we're seeing in just 2 sentences that reality is not what we perceive it to be, because it's being manipulated. We are governed. Our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. Okay, now, we are governed. Governed means to control. So we are controlled. Our minds are shaped. Okay, so if you think you have free will, if you think you have your own mind, if you think you're a free thinker, if you don't understand this, that your ideas, your habits and opinions have been molded by an invisible government, your tastes formed, your ideas suggested, the ones that you adamantly fight about on social media are largely suggested by men you've never even heard of. Okay, so we're 3 sentences in and already, wow, the world isn't the way that we think it is. 4th sentence. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. And again, he goes to democratic society and saying the only way we can organize a democratic society is to manipulate the mind of the masses. Because as you saw at the beginning, up at the top, what is this chapter called? Organizing Chaos. Because these people actually believe that if left to our own devices, we would just be chaotic. Society would be chaotic. because people don't know how to control themselves. So they need to be controlled by controlling what they believe through the media. So, I mean, this is, when I first heard this back in 2007, I actually first heard it from Adam Curtis's Century of the Self documentary from BBC. And when I first heard these paragraphs read, I was blown away. And I said, wow, no wonder the world is the way it is today. And why I'm sharing it with you here in this book, because to understand how the American dream became a nightmare, you have to understand that the reality that we're living in is a false reality that's been created by an invisible government, by men we've never heard of. Okay? So, they're telling you that democratic society is the only way that we can manage human beings, and they're telling you that it is being formed by ideas created from behind the scenes. They're telling you essentially you don't really have free will. They govern us by their qualities of natural leadership, their ability to supply needed ideas, and by their key position in the social structure. So again, they control us by their qualities of natural leadership. So what they do, this invisible government does, is they go into the Ivy League schools, for the most part, and they pluck out people that they see as charismatic, with qualities of natural leadership, who have the ability to supply needed ideas, and then they place them into key positions in the social structure so that the system operates the way that this invisible government wants it to operate. Okay? So people don't just rise from the grassroots and attain power in this system. They are handpicked from behind the scenes by this invisible government. So let's step away for a second here and take a look at this social structure. What are they talking about? And this is what it looks like. This is the system that I keep talking about. This is the hierarchy of the world that we live in right now. And it's broken down into 4 separate layers. We've got the world population control, world resource control, world financial control, and then what they refer to as the superclass. So let's break these down one by one and take a look at each level of control. First, we've got world population control, which is in charge of controlling human resources. And this is where we're going to see where propaganda starts to come into play. Now, here we are, we the people, down here at the bottom, 8 billion debt slaves, the energy source for the matrix, for the system itself. And right above us, we have media, government, and education. Now, at one point in history, especially the way America was set up, and to create a social order which enabled the American dream, the media, government, and education was meant to be a firewall for we the people, to protect us from people out there running other nations or corporations such as the British East India Company or the King of England. You know, they set up this country, they formed a government. And then they formed, obviously, the media, the newspapers, and the education system was already running as it should operate to truly educate people as to how to think. But in the mid-19th century, the first thing they attacked was education. And they hijacked the education system, turned it from a model of teaching children how to think critically, into one of what to believe. Okay? So they took out the critical thinking curriculum and basically taught children what to believe. All right? And this is the beginning of propaganda right here, was when they hijacked the education system. Now, by 1913, they had completely hijacked our government with the institution of the Federal Reserve System, which took over the power of our government to coin and set the value of money. And right around that same time period, they hijacked the media. So by the early 20th century, our firewall was gone because this invisible government operating from behind the scenes had already hijacked the firewall and took control over our education, our government, and our media. And we've been laid bare ever since for well over a century now. And as part of this population control, we've got religion, as well as the medical industrial complex and big pharma. Because if they can control your mind with the media and education, as well as your body and your health, they have complete control over the majority of the population. So that's how they control human resources. Now, moving up the hierarchy, we've got world resource control of natural resources, and that's left primarily to the corporations. And so what they do is they essentially manipulate government and media to extract the resources that they need to create their products and sell them into the marketplace. And they can't do that without financing. So that's why the world financial control is higher up in the hierarchy. So here we have world financial control, which is the central banks, which has been controlled for generations by debt, and we're slowly being merged into what's going to be a digital currency. Okay? But they control essentially the stock markets, the hedge funds, the Bank of International Settlements. All of these entities control the corporations and what they can and can't do. And if you play by the rules, you get funding. And if you don't play by the rules, you don't get funding. And it's the government that creates the rules and the laws that enable all this to happen, because everything flows down from the true power in the hierarchy. So that's how all this works. I get into more detail on this in my presentation for the Freedom Under Natural Law Conference last year. In fact, these screenshots are from that presentation. So if you want to get a little bit more detail, you can go and watch that presentation. But above the world financial control, we have what's called the superclass, what they refer to as the superclass. At the very top, we've got the Council of 13, the Committee of 300, the world's wealthiest families, and then the think tanks and non-governmental organizations. So what we have in there is the United Nations, George Soros's Open Society Foundation, the Club of Rome, Bohemian Club, World Economic Forum, the Bilderberg Group, Chatham House and Council on Foreign Relations, the Rand Corporation, Heritage Foundation, Clinton Foundation, and the Trilateral Commission. Those are the big ones that essentially create the narratives, okay, that then filter down through the hierarchy until it gets to a point where the information that they create to create the world that they want is disseminated through government and media and education. So this is where it all starts. Now, this superclass was, I don't know if you want to call it exposed, because it was revealed by an insider in this book from 2009, and which was called the superclass, and it's the global power elite and the world they are making. And this superclass is comprised of approximately 6,000 people. So essentially 6,000 people run the entire world. They run the entire system. And it's mostly people in this upper echelon, the world financial control, superclass. You may have some higher ups and corporations that are part of that superclass, but primarily it's this level of the hierarchy right here that forms this invisible government that Bernays is talking about in propaganda. So let's take a little bit closer look at what this superclass is. Each of them is 1 in a million. They number 6,000 on a planet of 6 billion. They run our governments, our largest corporations, the powerhouses of international finance, the media, world religions, and from the shadows, the world's most dangerous criminals and terrorist organizations. So everything we see on the world stage is run from this superclass of 6,000 people. They are the global superclass, and they are shaping the history of our time. Today's superclass has achieved unprecedented levels of wealth and power because it's a system that's enabled them to accumulate that wealth and power because of the way it's set up and because of the way the hierarchy is set up. And that's what I'm here to show you. Destroy the American dream and how we take it back. Because ultimately they're only 6,000 people and we're 8 billion. So we outnumber them over 1,000,000 to 1. They have globalized more rapidly than any other group. But do they have more in common with one another than their own countrymen, as nationalist critics have argued? They control globalization more than anyone else. But has their influence fed the growing economic and social inequity that divides the world? What happens behind closed-door meetings in Davos or aboard corporate jets at 41,000 feet? Conspiracy or collaboration? Deal-making or idle self-indulgence? Drawn from sources of exclusive interviews and extensive original reporting, Superclass answers all of these questions and more. It draws back the curtain on a privileged society that most of us know little about, even though it profoundly affects our everyday lives. And again, it's another one of those apologist types of books that says, well, this is who runs the world, and it probably needs to be this way because we're too stupid to figure out how to do it ourselves. Okay? That's essentially what this book is. What they do is they show you to your face, this is how the world really works. Essentially, they like to brag about it. So getting back to the book, this is the 6th sentence. Whatever attitude one chooses to take towards this condition, it remains a fact that in almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons, a trifling fraction of our 120 million, who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. So there you go. It's that superclass that essentially dominate all of us, right? The trifling fraction of the population in whatever sphere you can think of. Politics, business, social conduct, ethical thinking. They're manipulating everything. So again, unless you have learned the skills, the key to thinking critically, to becoming a free thinker, which we're going to cover in chapter 5, if you haven't done that in your life, you are more than likely manipulated by the official narratives that are put out there in the world. It is they who pull the wires, which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. So there you go. There's your 7 sentences right there. So this is they, the invisible government. You only see their hands, right? Pulling the wires that harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. So there you go. That's exactly why the world is the way it is today. Because this invisible government has created this social order. They've created this false reality. They've created this system that extracts the true wealth of the world created by we the people, and they accumulate that wealth for themselves so that they can control everything. And we're going to talk about how this all works as we go throughout this book. And there you go. So this is it. And again, I've highlighted in green the Democratic Society here twice because this is essentially what they've created with their propaganda. And this is what everyone talks about. You hear people talking about we have to save our democracy all the time because that's what they have been propagandized and indoctrinated to believe is the system that protects them, that serves them, when the Democratic Society is the cage. It's the nature of your cage. And I'm going to show you that in chapter 6. So this is how it all works. But let's go and look at binding guide. What does that mean? And Edward Bernays uses his words very carefully when he writes to show this invisible government that he's on their side and that he's revealing to the public in a way it's all very nuanced, but he uses words specifically. And binding guide is not something that we would normally think of as how you manage society, by binding it. So what does binding guide mean? Well, let's go take a look at something that refers to binding, which is fasces. Now, fasces is a bound bundle of wooden rods. And those wooden rods are the individuals, we the people of the population. Okay? Often but not always including an axe, with its blade emerging. The fasces is an Italian symbol that had its origin in the Etruscan civilization and was passed on to ancient Rome, where it symbolized a Roman king's power to punish his subjects, and later a magistrate's power and jurisdiction. Okay? So, fasces, where we get the word fascism from, is a system in which the subjects or citizens, and we'll talk about that in chapter 8, are bound together and controlled by this jurisdiction or governance, or the image of fasces has survived in the modern world as a representation of magisterial power, law, and governance. And we're going to talk about all of that in this book and how they rub it in your face. Okay? They tell you one thing, that we live in a democratic society, but in reality, what do we actually live in? And let's go take a look at our Congress. Okay? And this picture from one of President Trump's State of the Union addresses from his first term in office. And we see the Democrats on the left over here sitting, because he's obviously saying something that they don't like. We've got all the sycophantic Republicans over here on the right standing and applauding him. And we've got Mike Pence back there standing and applauding, and Nancy Pelosi, because this is all a show. This is all WWE. And people eat it up. And people actually vote for this every 2 to 4 years. And they still haven't figured out that it's all a show. But anyway, let's take a closer look at that wall behind Trump. And what do we see here? Now, this is the wall of Congress. Okay? And what do we see on the wall of Congress? It's a fasces. Right? It's their representation that we control you. You are our subjects. We are governing you, which means to control. And we can punish you if you don't abide by our laws. Okay, we're going to cover all of this in the book. We're going to cover lawful, legal in chapter 4. We're going to cover democracy and citizenship and subjects in chapter 8. So we're going to get to all of it. I'm just laying the foundation here. But what they do is they rub it in your face. And what this is called, by showing you who they really are in plain sight, because clearly this is in plain sight, it's called revelation of the method. And this was a phrase that was coined by James Shelby Downard in his book King Kill 33, which was a book about the esoteric symbolism behind the JFK assassination. Okay, and what he called revelation of the method is the alchemical processing of a society by its controllers. So essentially what he means here is that they not only show you what they're doing in plain sight, that's why the fasces are right there in Congress, but what they're doing in as far as alchemically processing the society is and this is all part of the propaganda, they tell you the world that they want you to create through their propaganda, through their media, through their speeches, through their books and their white papers. Okay? This is revelation of the method. They tell you exactly not only the world that you're living in, the reality that you're living in, but they also hint to you that when the time comes, you are going to create this for us. And when you create it and you don't like it, Well, that's on you, because you're the ones who created it. We only suggested it, but you actually created it. And what that does, based on their religious beliefs, and their religion is primarily Luciferianism, is that it shifts the karma off of them onto you, onto we the people. Because in their mind, we showed you what we're doing. And if you accept it and you build it and you suffer the consequences of it, well, it's your fault. And this is their belief system, and this is what they believe. So this is revelation of the method. So one of the greatest examples of revelation of the method and predictive programming out there in pop culture is the movie The Matrix. Because in this movie they show you exactly the world as it is, but done through fiction and allegory and metaphor. But if you really dissect the Matrix, this is the world as it is. So let's go back to that social structure again. This is the hierarchy of the world, and essentially everything above us is the Matrix, right? The system is the Matrix. And what do they describe the Matrix as in the movie? Well, he said it's the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. So if you're blinded from the truth, you're essentially living in a false reality. Okay, and that's what the Matrix is all about. But so billions of people believe in this false reality. And so it's become their reality, even though it's not based in objective truth. Okay? Now, when Morpheus told that to Neo, Neo said, "What truth?" And Morpheus said that you're a slave, that this is a system that you were born into. And that's exactly the world that we live in. Because everyone is born into the system. The day you're born, you get a birth certificate. You become a share of stock in the system that then uses that to harvest your wealth your entire life and become wealthier and more powerful. And this is how the system perpetuates. This is how it works. Now Morpheus also told Neo throughout the movie, first, as long as the Matrix exists, humanity will never be free. And so if we go back to the introduction of this video book, that guy said, ultimately we're powerless unless the whole system comes down. This is the system. This is the Matrix. And yes, individually we're powerless. But as I'm going to show you in chapter 8, we're the only ones that have the power to bring the system down. Okay? So as long as the system, the Matrix, exists, we will never be free. We'll be slaves. And all those people complaining about things in that opening montage of the introduction, things are only going to get worse. Okay? So this book is going to show you how we dissolve it. But you have to understand the nature of our reality before we can understand how much power we have and the power that we do have to take it all apart. There was one more scene in the Matrix in that white room where he essentially told us what we are. And he held up that Duracell copper top battery. He said, this is what they are turning you into. But they're not turning us into. We already are the energy source for the entire Matrix. We fuel the entire thing. We create everything. Now they create the money, but we create the value. We create the material value of everything. Then they extract it with their government and their corporations and their financial system. They extract the real wealth that we the people create so that this system can keep running. But what I'm going to show you is that once we unite, we can walk away and create a whole new system that keeps all the wealth amongst we the people. And we're going to dissolve the Matrix. That's what this book is about. So hopefully you're beginning to see that through the use of propaganda and mind control, they have created this false reality. This is what they don't want you to see. That's what he said at the end of the movie. So again, they tell you exactly in the movie what you need to do to free yourselves. But here we are, 25 years later, 1999, 27 years later, and people still haven't figured it out. That they told us exactly, this is the world that you live in, this is how you free yourselves, and we still haven't figured out how to do it. But I'm going to show you in this book how we do that. So getting back to the book. These 7 sentences show you exactly why the world is the way it is today, why people act the way they do. Now, what these 7 sentences create, or what these 7 sentences describe, is what is called a hive mind. Okay? Now, a hive mind is the collective mental activity, coordinated behavior of a colony regarded as comparable to a single mind controlling the behavior of an individual organism. So propaganda and this invisible government, their purpose is to create hive minds. And they create all different kinds of hive minds. They create hive minds that get people on that lowest level of the matrix, the hierarchy, to fight over. You've got your Republican hive mind. You've got your Democrat hive mind. You've got your religious hive minds. You've got thousands of different hive minds out there of beliefs that people accept as their reality. And if someone doesn't align with their reality, they're told that that person is the enemy. And you can't communicate with them. You can't work with them, cooperate with them, right? Because they have a different belief system. And so in creating these hive minds with propaganda, this invisible government maintains control of the entire matrix system. Okay? A hive mind is a collective consciousness among a group where individuals think and act as a unified entity. It can also describe the phenomenon of groupthink, where decision-making is influenced by a desire for harmony within the group, often leading to irrational outcomes. And we saw this play out perfectly during COVID. You know, people chose to align with their group. You know, the pro-Vs versus the anti-Vs, right? The people who believe that there was an actual disease, an actual virus, versus the people who knew that it was a psyop from the beginning. Okay? We're trying to show you that it's all an illusion, and we've got the receipts and the documentation to show you that your hive mind beliefs are false, but you, out of desire for harmony within your group, you fight us, and you attack us, and you ridicule us. And it led to, obviously, irrational outcomes, because we know what happened because of that groupthink mentality, that hive mind groupthink mentality. And so this is what the purpose of propaganda is. And this is how the invisible government uses it to maintain control, to maintain power, so that we don't wake up to their reality, to this false reality that we're living in. This is what we see on social media, okay? We see people essentially regurgitating what their hive mind is telling them, their hive mind network, okay? Because what they are is they're plugged into a network, a hive mind network. And this is what I call the 4 Ps. They're plagiarists, they're posers, they're pretenders, and they're parrots. All right? And I can tell if I'm communicating with someone who's a free thinker or if I'm communicating with someone who is plugged into a hive mind. That's, I mean, after 19 years, I know exactly who I'm dealing with on social media. And have a chuckle when people try and call me out because they think that their hive mind programming is the truth when I know it's not, right? So essentially what we have is a society now on a computer network. We have what are called dumb nodes. Okay, now a dumb node is essentially just a keyboard and a monitor that's hooked up to a central computer on the network, but it doesn't actually have a processor in the computer itself. So a dumb node is essentially just showing the user what the main computer on the network is telling you. Okay, doesn't have any processing power itself. And so when you're on social media and you're dealing with someone who's plugged into a hive mind network, they're essentially just a dumb node, because a dumb node on a computer network refers to a device that has limited processing capabilities and does not perform any significant data processing or decision making. They typically rely on more intelligent devices in the network to manage data and communication tasks, and that's exactly what we see. We have people parroting, plagiarizing, pretending, just regurgitating what their hive mind networks are telling them to believe. And there's no thinking going on. The dumb nodes, also referred to as dumb devices, are network devices that do not process data or make decisions. So they have no central processing unit. Okay, they can only repeat instruction sets. They can only repeat what is being told to them. And that's essentially what most of humanity is. They simply transmit data without any intelligence or capability to interpret the information they handle. Okay? And a long time ago when I first woke up, those first 3 years, and even for years after, I would get into arguments with people online, and I knew that they didn't know what they were talking about. But it took me a long time to realize that, well, this is what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with people who have no critical thinking skills that we're going to talk about in Chapter 5 of this video book. Show you how to reclaim the mind. And so it doesn't bother me anymore. I just kind of laugh it off when people attack me online because I know I'm dealing with dumb nodes on hive mind networks that were created by the invisible government using propaganda to program their minds to believe certain things. Because that's the world we live in. And the purpose of this book is to shatter this hive mind mentality. To show people that, no, your mind is not your own. Okay? It was revealed to us 100 years ago in propaganda that your opinions and habits are intelligently and consciously manipulated from behind the scenes by an invisible government and people you've never heard of. Okay? That's why I'm starting this whole entire book with this information. Because you have to understand that unless you have learned the curriculum to take full control of your own mind and become a free thinker, you may be plugged into a hive mind, which is telling you what to believe and what to regurgitate and what to share. So when people attack me, it's essentially the herd. What the herd hates most is the one who thinks differently. It is not so much the opinion itself, but the audacity of wanting to think for themselves, something that they do not know how to do. And that's, Schopenhauer observed that in society 200 years ago. And not much has changed. Because again, people need to learn how to think critically. In most societies, monarchies, hierarchies throughout history have not wanted a critically thinking population, because what that does is it puts their power in jeopardy. They want a dumb population. They want a population that can't think for themselves. They want a population that will just regurgitate what they're told by the authorities, by the central processing unit, by the government that needs them to believe certain things so that society operates in the exact way that they want it to. Okay? This is why the world is the way it is today. And that's going to wrap it up for part 1 of chapter 1. In part 2, we're going to talk about who are they and what kind of people and organizations comprise this invisible government. Because ultimately, to solve the problem, we need to understand who these people are, how they operate, and what actual organizations comprise this invisible government, who are controlling the mind of the masses. So like I said in the introduction, my goal is to shatter the false beliefs of the people. And I just showed why they're false beliefs, because they have been programmed their entire lives to believe certain things that are simply not true, so that their democratic society can operate as they want it to. And we don't want to be in a democratic society any longer, or the democratic society as they define it. Because what I'm going to show you is the true meaning of democracy in Chapter 8. So if you're trying to save democracy, you may be a dumb node on a hive mind network regurgitating what this invisible government wants you to believe so that you keep on voting for more of the same. All right, we have to stop that. And by the time you're done with Chapter 8 and you understand everything, you're going to realize that everything you've been taught is a lie. Okay? So, again, thank you for your time. I appreciate you. And follow me now to part 2 as we move on in this journey to free humanity. We'll see you over there. Bye-bye.